Good evening, all. Thank you for joining us. We will get started in just a moment, just ensuring that everyone can navigate their way from the waiting room into the webinar. Also, at any point during tonight's webinar, if you were disconnected, you will be prompted to join our live stream happening on our YouTube channel. This session has been one of the most popular sessions that we have ever had for our Try and Family web series. And so we will be live streaming so that there is no cap on attendance tonight on our YouTube channel. A quick reminder before we get started is that tonight's session will be recorded, posted on our website and our YouTube channel in the following days. At any time tonight, please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar located at the bottom of your screen. We will have time after tonight's presentation to do a live question and answer, but we also have staff on the back end who will work to help answer your questions throughout tonight's webinar. All right, again, thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Try and Family web series session entitled Home Away from Home, Navigating On and Off Campus Housing. We have a great panelist of experts here to give you all the updated information on housing for your students if they are returning to live on campus next year or if they're moving off campus, and what the process is for each living situation looks like. My name is Dan Perez. I am the Assistant Director for the Office of Parent and Family Programs. I am so excited to have everyone here, not just our experts, but also you all, because we know that housing is integral to a student's experience, be it on campus or off campus. And we know that for many different students from many different areas, be it local, out of state, international, that trying to find a place to live that fits their needs but also allows them to be successful is of utmost importance. So that is why we have put together a great collection of panelists tonight who will present information that will assist students and family members such as yourselves in either reapplying for on-campus housing in the coming year or in their search for off-campus housing. So I don't want to take any longer getting to our panelists, and I'm going to throw it over to Chris Dyes, who is the Interim Associate Director of Housing Administration, to speak on on-campus housing.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chris Dyes, and I'm the Associate Director for Housing Administrative Services. I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk to you about the undergraduate housing options that are available on campus. Dan, if you want to go to the next slide. So first and foremost, it's really important that students who are eligible to go through the continuing student housing process, that it's important that all deadlines are met. Deadlines really drive this process, and it's a very intensive process. So it's really important that your students are paying attention to all of those. So those deadlines are the housing application deadline, and as well as the housing contract and prepayment deadlines. I'll be giving you all those dates in one moment. And Dan also said that he's going to be sending out the slide deck to everyone who is here so that they have this information as well. Eligibility notices for those students who are eligible for the continuing student housing application were sent in January. So all current students who are eligible to apply for our continuing student housing application should have received an email from us. However, it's really important that students remain eligible throughout this entire process. So that means be registered for classes, enrolled full-time, meet all the housing deadlines, and not have any outstanding account balances. Go ahead, next slide. I'm sure you've all heard about the housing priority. So housing will be offered using the housing priority system. So the first priority will be our scholars and new incoming students who have priority status based on their scholarship program or have mandated living on campus as part of their offer. The second tier will be new and incoming first-year students and transfer students. The third tier will be returning second-year students, including second-year transfer students who resided in on-campus housing for the last 2 of 3 quarters. Then remaining second-year students, including second-year transfer students, and 4 remaining third and fourth year students. Sorry, my numbers didn't carry over. So it's priority 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We expect to house groups 1, 2, and some students from group 3. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the housing waitlist. So those students who don't receive a contract through the initial contracting process will be moved to an undergraduate housing waitlist. At this point, they will be asked to update their housing need during this or after this process. So they will, by March 14th, they will learn whether or not they have a contract for the 22-23 school year. And if not, then they will be moved to the housing waitlist. Any student who is not in the priority 1, 2, or 3 will be the priority 4 and 5 students can apply once the waitlist application opens in June. It's really important that students note that submitting an application for our waitlist does not guarantee you an off-campus and a space on campus. So we recommend having a backup plan and encourage you to review the off-campus housing options, which you'll hear more about in a few moments. Students are responsible for updating information through the waitlist, so make sure that your students are removing themselves when housing is no longer needed. More information about our waitlist can be found at hth.ucsd.edu. And next slide. So the most important piece down here is for continuing students. Those students, again, have been notified that they're eligible for the continuation process. That application opens up on February 22nd and is live through March 1st. This is not a first come, first served process, so your students do not need to be online at 11:59 to apply for housing. They can apply at any time through this February 22nd through March 1st deadline, but they do have to reply by March 1st. The contract system is based on a random lottery, not the application date time. Again, your student will know by March 14th if they have received a contract for housing. If they are sent an email about contracting, they must do so by March 14th. If they did not receive an email, that means they will be moved to the housing waitlist at that time. Next slide, please. So UC San Diego is committed to offering additional rooms for general inclusive housing and roommate and apartment mates. So gender inclusive housing, students will select into a space designated for gender inclusive housing. This does not mean that there is a single room guarantee, and students understand and agree that their gender marker is not a factor in selecting available spaces. And then roommate, apartment, suite mates. So once your student is found out that they are eligible and have a contract for the 22-23 school year, they'll be able to include their roommate, suite mate spaces at that time. So they must be in the same room selection category, must be in the same gender, and these students cannot be from different colleges. So they must be in the same college. Next slide, please. Just some information about housing contract dining plans. So dining plans are required for new incoming students and continuing students. So continuing students have 3 plans to choose from. The 3 plans are the 5623. So that's a more comprehensive dining plan If you're going to be on campus all day, they cover 3 meals a day for 5 days a week. The 3749 plan is meant to cover 2 meals a day, 5 days a week. And the 1874 plan is the minimum choice dining plan for continuing residents. So that's about 1 meal a day. Next slide. Summer housing is going to be available this year, and it's a completely separate different application process than our academic year process. So the summer application process will go live April 18th. We have 3 different programs for students in the summer. The first is our Accelerate program, the traditional summer program, and the summer success program. More information will be available in March. And again, that application goes live on April 18th. Next slide. So the next couple slides are going to be about our robust program for students who are committed relationships, graduate students, or undergrad students with dependents. Next slide. So eligible students for our graduate and family housing are those who are in full-time graduate programs or professional students, undergrad students with dependents, and full-time undergraduate student couples. There is a priority program for this program as well. So the first priority is new incoming students, students referred by the Office of Students with Disabilities, and students with children. All other students are based on application date in this process. And our last slide. These are some resources that are available, and then all of these will be available again online and through this presentation at the end. And I think those are my slides.
Thank you so much, Chris. And again, I know this is a ton of information. So for all of you watching in the Zoom or on the live stream on YouTube, this PowerPoint will be converted to a PDF and emailed out tomorrow along with the recording of tonight's session. It's now my pleasure to welcome Marissa and Kameo from the off-campus housing services located in our Basic Needs Hub.
Thank you so much, Dan. If you can go to the next slide, please. So what is good, everybody? My name is Kameo Quenga, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the Basic Needs Housing and Educations Coordinator here at the Hub.
And my name is Marissa Islas, pronouns she, her, hers as well, and I'm the Basic Needs Housing and Education Assistant. I hope everyone is having a lovely Wednesday so far. Next slide, please.
So thank you to Parent and Family Programs for allowing us to take part in today's webinar, and welcome to all of our parents, families, and students who may be joining us today. We'll be discussing the various resources that UCSD shares with all of our students and our greater community. It is not a secret that we are currently experiencing a national and statewide housing crisis, and that continues to be inflated because of the ongoing pandemic. Thus, we may not be able to provide specific solutions today. However, we will attempt to share resources and starting points as you and or your student embark on their housing search. Next slide, please.
So what is the Off-Campus Housing Office? The Off-Campus Housing Office offers resources to aid students in their transition to off-campus living. A resource some of y'all may have already heard about is the Off-Campus Housing website. The Off-Campus Housing website is solely for UCSG affiliates, ensuring optimal safety and authenticity. Here you can access property listings or upload your own property listing, do a roommate search, seek platform recommendations, read up on first-time renting tips, lease overviews, emergency resources, and more. Next slide, please. Once you enter offcampushousing.ucsd.edu into your search bar, you will see a layout like this. You can log in with your UCSD user ID or PID if you are a student, faculty, or staff. If you are a property lister or someone without a user ID or PID, you will see an option on the right to log in as a guest. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the Off-Campus Housing website is a UCSD managed property listing website that is only for UCSD affiliates. The login credential requirement assists in creating a safer platform. When searching for housing, you can adjust your preferences by how much you are looking to spend, if you want a house or apartment, and any other specific requests. A majority of listings are close to campus, and you can also review rental agreements and learn about your responsibilities as a tenant, both being fundamental parts of the housing process. And last but not least, there are resources for commuters, such as information on the campus shuttles, parking, affordable grocery stores, and more. Next slide, please. The roommate search tool on the off-campus website provides students with the opportunity to search for roommates that attend UCSD as well. I think we're ahead one slide, by the way, but if you could go back. Thank you. The roommate search tool on the off-campus website provides students with the opportunity to search for roommates that attend UCSD as well. They can create their own roommate profiles as well as browse those of other students. And students can include important information relating to their preferences and roommate characteristics. Next slide, please.
All right, and switching gears a little bit. So a public property search platform we like to recommend is PadMapper. This website allows you to navigate through helpful features that take your preference into consideration. For example, the duration of your stay, your budget, and others. Also, students can specify the type of housing they're looking for, whether that be a studio, house, or apartment. And a really great feature that PadMapper has available is that all available properties displayed in a map. So where you can zoom in and take a look at what is around the property to get a better idea of the location that would best fit you and your circumstances. Next slide. Additionally, a public website that's great for connecting potential roommates is Spare Room. This is a non-UCSD managed public roommate search website that also includes properties available all throughout San Diego County, some being more affordable than others. Each listing has roommate information along with property information. And of course, there are other websites that are common among UC San Diego students, and we will link all other public property search and roommate search platforms in the chat.
Thank you. Just dropped a few links in the chat. So moving on to roommate searching tips. If you're moving off campus, consider living with roommates as a way to save as much money as possible when splitting costs of rent and utilities. Even when it comes to housing applications, having roommates can increase one's chances of getting approved. Sorry, just a second. Sorry about that. So like I was saying, even when it comes to housing applications, having roommates can increase one's chances of getting approved. For instance, it's easier to reach the minimum income requirement between 4 people versus when living alone. Of course, before moving in with anyone, it is crucial to have in-depth conversations with your potential roommates. One should discuss things such as the rent, payment dates, lease terms and length, relevant culture and identity considerations, household preferences, including smoking, drinking, substance use, overnight guest policies, noise levels, cleaning responsibilities, lease breaking scenarios, and shared areas. Next slide, please. Additionally, it's important to discuss COVID-19 safety regarding updated guidelines and comfort levels with gatherings. Be honest in your preferences, as it is easier to change your mind on living together before it happens than when you are bound together by a lease. Next slide, please. So before moving off campus, you're going to want to run through a short list that'll help you narrow down your options. First, identify your budget. Be realistic about what you can and cannot afford. For example, think about paying for a $600 double versus a $1,000 single. Next, save money for a deposit in order to have property saved for you. Not only that, but save money for a couple months worth of rent if your circumstances allow it. This will help to prevent concerns due to financial burdens. Also consider rent, utilities, and living expenses, such as going out to eat within your budget planning. And if your budget is not stable, you can look for short-term leases. For example, a month-to-month lease would lessen financial pressures of saving enough money for several months worth of rent. Given that looking for housing can be very, very stressful and time consuming, make sure to give yourself enough time to look at as many options as possible. Some housing searches may be completed quickly and others can take much longer. In that case, try contacting properties as soon as possible and use multiple search platforms. When searching for housing, prioritize your needs instead of your wants. For instance, being near a bus stop is more important than a place that has a pool, but a bus stop that is 10 to 15 minutes away walking. And if you're going to be living with roommates, then consider who that might be. Do you have current roommates that would possibly be interested? Or what about friends from a dorm or friends from an organization you're a part of? Next slide, please.
So given the housing crisis, we emphasize considering areas outside of La Jolla. There aren't many vacancies in the area at the moment, so therefore we recommend expanding your search radius to other parts of San Diego. These include North San Diego, which include University City, Claremont, Mira Mesa, and Pacific Beach, or metro area, Central San Diego, Hillcrest, City Heights, or SDSU College area, East San Diego, La Mesa, Spring Valley, and El Cajon, and South San Diego, National City, San Isidro, and Chula Vista. So remember, you're not only looking for a place, you're gonna be immersed within a community. So find the area that best fits you and your needs. Next slide, please. So transitioning into some first time renting tips. If this is your first time renting, firstly, as I'm sure many of you may be already doing so, continue contacting properties as soon as you see a listing in order to schedule tours, whether that be virtual or in person. Additionally, application fees can pile up also, so watch out for those as best as you can, and note that not all properties will require an application fee. Another one is to make sure to use the reverse image search on Google when listing seems off to confirm reliability. If the same picture shows up on a listing that's not in San Diego, it is almost surely fake. Something to note is that properties often require 2.5 times the monthly income in comparison to the rent amount, making it difficult to be approved. However, a quick tip, if you receive financial aid, it is worth a shot to include your financial aid awards in your total income. So downloading one's financial aid package from their Triton link would suffice as supporting documents. Any other potential roommates that are also applying with you can do the same for their estimated total income. Given that financial aid is meant to cover portions of housing, some properties managers may accept this as a form of income for students. And if you do not receive financial aid, co-signing is also an option, but want to note that it is a big legal liability that the co-signer will have to be taking on. So just having those appropriate conversations. Next slide. And the reason why it's a big legal liability is because these are legally binding documents. So be sure to review them thoroughly before signing. And if you require any assistance, please reach out to Student Legal Services, who you will hear from in a moment, and consider plenty of options and be wary of scams. Trust me, y'all, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Next slide.
Lastly, here are some additional resources for y'all. Feel free to screenshot or take a picture of the slide. So first is the basic needs assistance form. If any of y'all have specific concerns with anything that we've discussed today, I highly recommend to schedule a 30-minute one-on-one with our basic needs staff. So if you just go to basicneeds.ucsd.edu and click on the assistance forms tab, it'll take you to the assistance form that we're talking about. And so moving on to another resource, the Hub and OMS Grad and Family Housing has a personal hygiene program, and here you can find baby diapers, baby wipes, infant formula, toddler formula, baby food, and other general hygiene products. Following with the LIFT program, if you are facing challenges to access adequate transportation, we encourage you to complete the Basic Needs LIFT program form. This form will be assessed by a Basic Needs staff member who will then follow up with you, providing a one-time LIFT ride code /link, both to and from your destination. Next, for emergency housing assistance, one of the resources that the Hub has to offer through the off-campus housing office is the emergency housing protocol for currently registered undergrad and graduate students. So if students are in an emergency, we encourage them to complete the basic needs assistance form or contact their Dean of Student Affairs. And I just want to emphasize that this applies to emergency situations only. So students are placed in emergency housing, and this will usually be on campus for a maximum of 30 days. Documentation status is not a factor for emergency housing. And once a student is placed in this emergency housing, they are expected to create a transition plan. A case manager can help with this transition plan, and it'll be appropriately suiting your circumstances. Next is HUGS. If you are an international student searching for housing off campus, HUGS International Corporation can help compute a credit score through your I-20 and student visa information to assist in your housing search. And lastly, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought on financial hardships for all, especially for renters. So to alleviate the current housing insecurity crisis, the state of California is currently offering the COVID-19 rent relief program, which provides financial assistance for rent and utilities during the pandemic for those who are eligible. Both renters and landlords can apply for this program, and depending on the address of the property, you may be eligible for local programs that can assist you. Next slide, please. And here's the Hub's website and email. As always, feel free to contact us through these platforms if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Marissa and Kameo, for that great information. And as they've talked about the off-campus housing search, we know we've gotten lots of questions the legalities and the process that goes into leasing housing off campus. So I would like to bring on Giancarlo Senior, apologies, to speak on tips for renting housing off campus.
Thank you, Dan. Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm John Carlos Senior. I'm an attorney and I'm the Director of Student Legal Services at UCSD. So what that means is, as long as what my office does is we provide free confidential counseling, education, referrals to all currently registered UCSD students. So what that means is that as long as your students are enrolled at UCSD, they have a free lawyer, in fact, 2 free lawyers to come talk to about any and all legal issues, questions, or problems that they may have. And landlord-tenant law and tenants' rights is just one of many questions that we get at Student Legal Services. So unfortunately, by the way, the slide that housing is not available, the one in the picture. Could you advance to the next slide, please? So I want to be brief because I know that my colleagues have a lot of really important things to say, and y'all have plenty of really wonderful questions to address. And by the way, one of them that I saw in the Q&A previously, when to start your search off campus and when is a typical time. And of course, the easy answer is, well, the sooner the better. A lot of folks look in April, May, June. The fact is, with the current housing situation locally, the sooner you can do it, the better. Of course, a lot of folks are going to be waiting for their to hear back from on-campus housing in terms of what their options might be. But I say, the sooner the better when it, in the spring. There's also a window of time in the late summer before fall starts, but where some folks will find housing, but the sooner the better. So that's tip A, because I haven't got to my actual top 5 renting tips, at least in terms of things to consider if you are going to be living off campus. Number 1, and as my colleagues at Basic Needs and off-campus housing mentioned, you got to watch out for scams. I would absolutely recommend that, to the extent possible, you do not send any money that on behalf of your student without looking at the place. And I know that can be really, really difficult, especially for international students who are not, and as well as any non-local students. But I would absolutely say it's worth it. And yes, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. I can't tell you how often our students get scammed in terms of housing, in terms of other things. So do the research that you can. You can even use a website called Parcel Quest to look up who the owner of property is in the state of California. But yes, absolutely watch out for scams. and do not send any security deposit or any deposit money unless you have seen a contract and know that the place is going to be available. Number one, that's number one. Number two, and another subject that's very important to consider, all tenants / roommates are jointly and severally liable. So California has a law that has a rule of law that basically says that anybody named in a lease and anybody who co-signs or guarantees the lease can be held up to 100% responsible for the obligations under the lease. So what that means is if you say hypothetically have 4 roommates and one roommate pays their share of the rent, but another one does not pay their share, the landlord not only has the right to file an eviction lawsuit, not only against the one individual who didn't pay their share, but against everybody named on the lease. In other words, there are no such thing as shares under the law when it comes to joint and several liability. Another example is if you have another roommate who's violating the overnight policy by bringing guests over, or somebody's got a pet and there's a no pet policy, and or in fact, if somebody is not treated their particular room very well, and the landlord deducts from that at the end of the lease, that comes out of everybody's security deposit. So all that's to say, the tenants are jointly and severally liable. That means they're basically entering into a contract with one another that's taken very, very seriously. And it's up to the landlords if they want to have that joint and several liability. In other words, in some circumstances, students have been able to get individual leases that just identify them, but those are actually really rare. And frankly, it's because if it's this way under joint several liability rules, again, the landlord can bring everybody to court, and it's up to the court to say that, for example, the landlord is owed money, and then it's kind of left up to the roommates to figure out amongst themselves who's liable. So keep in mind that you really want to get to know your roommate as well as possible before you live with them. You can also consider using a roommate agreement. We have an example if you go to our homepage at sls.ucsd.edu and look under sample forms and agreements, and it's customizable. So you can include information in terms of how much each person is going to pay regarding their share of the rent, and how much each person is going to pay in terms of security deposit, who's going to put what utilities and whose name, who's going to be paying for those, anything pretty much that you want to sort of clarify in that. I think at the very least, it's a really good conversation piece so that you know before you sign a contract, a legally binding agreement with a roommate, what you're getting into there. And as was mentioned by Dan, I think another really important thing to consider is co-signers or guarantors. And Kameo also mentioned it, that as I said previously, anybody who signs onto a contract basically promising to pay, they too are going to be potentially held liable. So I try to discourage students from adding co-signers / guarantors. And by the way, that means the same thing, co-signer, guarantor. I discourage students from adding those co-signers or guarantors to a lease, just because it increases exposure. And because of the joint and several liability, one parent of one tenant, say hypothetically, can get sued for the acts of another tenant at the residence. So that's why you want to be mindful before you do that. Ultimately, it is up to the landlord to decide if they're going to insist on having that. I think it's a great a piece of advice to get a statement from the folks at financial aid, as well as anybody who's living on campus who's going to move off campus, to talk to their housing office. They can get basically a landlord good reference letter from the on-campus residence office. So those are some things to consider to try to reduce the likelihood that a landlord is going to require a co-signer. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, get renter's insurance. The typical types of coverage that you get under renter's insurance include, number one, personal property coverage, and that basically means coverage for an individual's personal items. And so typically, it'll come in the form of $20,000 or $25,000 insurance, and you can raise or lower that number depending upon your student's personal property. And it's beneficial to cover loss, theft, or damage of personal property. And you would want it to have proof of ownership in case of loss, theft, or damage. In other words, it's good to take pictures of the big ticket items, the computer, the bicycle, whatever other sort of things that people want to be reimbursed if they were to lose or have taken from them. It's also, of course, good to keep in copies of invoices and receipts for purchases for the big ticket items. So that's personal property. Another typical type of coverage is liability insurance, and that's basically to cover the tenants in case a guest gets injured, say on the property, that sort of a thing. As I said, a lot of places now off campus require both liability and personal property. Sometimes, though, it's not enough to cover some other issues that we might see. So for example, property damage to other units, and flood insurance, which I would not recommend that you get flood insurance per se, but I would suggest that you get the best insurance possible so that if there is a flood resulting from plumbing, particularly, that's the one that I will see from time to time, that there's coverage there. You can also get mold/mildew coverage, and in addition, loss of use coverage. That's coverage that, say, in case there is a plumbing leak and the landlord has to come in to dry out the floors and the walls or replace things. And so the tenant or tenants have to temporarily relocate for a period of time. It's this loss of use coverage that basically will pay for the hotel. Otherwise, landlords are pretty limited in terms of the obligations they have under in a situation like that, unless it's easily provable that it's the landlord's responsibility in terms of the repair. But that's frequently a debate, and that's why you want to have renter's insurance. You might, for those of you who, for those parents and guardians out there who own your own homes, I would absolutely recommend that you encourage that you talk to your insurance companies to see if you can add your student if they're living off campus. A lot of times they won't do that, but at least maybe you can get a discount, and maybe you can add them. As I said, certain policies will allow that. And also, of course, looking into bundling policies. So any students who have their own cars and have insurance for them, they can look into hopefully getting a discount by having multiple types of policies with one insurance company. I don't have a particular insurance company to recommend. I would just say get the best that you can afford, and I really, really strongly encourage that. And as it says in the last line there, some landlords may require it, but that might not always cover all the issues. So get the best that you can. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, and then my last 2 pointers. Number 4, this security deposit, it's the single biggest issue that we see at Student Legal Services, is folks who, after they've moved out, are having difficulty getting their security deposits back from their landlord. So, of course, a security deposit is the amount of money that a tenant pays a landlord at the beginning of the lease. The landlord's supposed to hold on to that, and at the end of the lease, give it back. And by the way, if you live on campus, there's also a security deposit typically required for a room. So the obligation of the tenant, I should say, under the law, is to leave the place as it was found, to return it in the same condition as it was delivered upon move out, as was upon move in. So in other words, if it's a year-long lease and you move out, you have to be able to prove that you left it when you moved out in the same condition as it was when you moved in a year earlier. That's a lot of time. So I would suggest, among other things, number one, take lots of pictures. Make sure that your student takes lots of pictures of the place before they move in, before they move a single stick of furniture in, to do that. And of course, also to do it upon move out, and keep those, of course, in the event that you have to, that there's a legal matter that comes up. And hopefully there won't be, but this is, to me, is the best sort of protection to avoid that sort of situation. Number two, do an inspection checklist. So a physical document where basically a tenant upon move-in can fill it out and indicate what, any problems that might pre-exist there moving in. In other words, anything they see upon their initial inspection. A lot of times landlords will provide that document, but if not, it's always good to have one. And as you can see, we've got one. A link to one at our homepage, also at sls.ucsd.edu. It's a good practice at the end of the lease to give the landlord at least 30 days prior written notice of the tenant's intent to end the lease, to terminate at the end. So even if a lease says, this lease ends on July 1st, 2022, it's always good practice to make sure that your student puts in writing at least 1 month ahead of time. In other words, puts a deadline to say, to June 1st, 2022, that is a 30-day deadline for the tenant to provide notice to the landlord of the tenant's intent to move out at the end of the lease. I can't tell you how frequently I've heard about cases where a student hasn't given adequate notice of 30 days and the landlord seeks an additional month's rent because of that. Okay, always do the initial inspection before you move out. I know I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but it's best to keep that in mind, that a tenant has the right under the law to request basically a pre-move out inspection, and that's really beneficial and for their protection. And then in terms of any repairs or other issues and any communications with the landlord or leasing office, make sure you get it in writing, of course. And then the last thing, item 5 is my office, as Kameo suggested, Student Legal Services. We're available to answer any questions that your students might have in terms of leases and any other types of contracts and documents, of course. But we always send an all-campus email out in mid-spring to let everybody know that, hey, before you sign your lease, come to our office. So please feel free to keep this in mind. I'm happy to report that a decent number of the referrals we get are from parents who are encouraging their students to come to our office. Why not? It's totally free. So I would absolutely encourage it. So there's our contact information for our office. That's it for me. And so I will turn it back to Dan. And of course, I will be hanging out in case there are any questions going forward. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, John Carlos. All right, I'd like to ask all the panelists to hop back on so we can enter this portion of the session, which is our live Q&A. So again, please feel free to continue utilizing the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen, or you can utilize the chat feature on YouTube. We have staff monitoring both, and we'll answer as many questions as possible tonight. So there are quite a bit of questions, as we expected, and so I'm going to go through and try and knock down as many as I can. If at any point tonight you have a question that doesn't get answered, or you think of a question after this session or while you're watching the recording, please feel free to email parents@ucsd.edu. We'll drop that email in the chat, or housinginfo@ucsd.edu. So because we will do our best to answer all the questions we have here tonight. So the first question I have is about lease timelines. So I think this is mainly for our off-campus crew. The question from a parent says, if my student needs to find a place in September, how does that usually work? When will they sign the rental agreement? Can they sign in April to start in September? How would you recommend starting that process when you're looking for housing in the spring, but you need it for the fall?
Great question. And I will be transparent in saying that I do not have any experience with being able to sign a rental agreement months prior to move-in date. So for example, simply looking for rental agreements that are matching your specific move-in date. So if it is within September and you do want to sign on early, then it's ensuring that you're not starting to pay until you do move in. Again, really reading through those legal documents, because at the end of the day, once they're signed and submitted, that's your name on that application. In addition, if you are waiting to move in September, yes, look in April, but I can tell you by the influx and the flow of folks moving in and moving out, there is going to be an influx of housing contracts for the start of summer as well as at the end of summer. So again, it's just being patient with your timeline while also being picky with your needs.
I can just follow up with that, John Carlos, Student Legal Services. It's a good question because a lot of times we'll see folks looking, finding a place in March, April, May, but the lease won't actually start until September. And in those situations, a lot of times the landlord will ask the tenant to pay a holding deposit. So basically, a few $100s that'll basically reserve the place, make the landlord basically promise not to rent it out to anybody else and to reserve it for that particular person. That's a pretty common thing to do. And so that might be one thing that you might want to consider as an option is placing a holding deposit on a place. And let me know, hopefully I explained that well enough. If not, please feel free to follow up in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you both for those answers. All right, we're going to stay with the break talk. Chris, this may be a question for you and Housing Dining Administration. Where would students store, or where do you recommend that students store large items such as maybe micro fridges during the summer in between years living on campus?
Yes, we just contracted with a service through HDH, and I will put that in the resources because I don't have it right with me right now, but we do have a service and we'll be getting that on a move out website that we'll be posting as we get closer to move out as well. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the chat.
Perfect. I know. I lived on campus my 4 years as an undergraduate, and I will say moving in and out of a residence hall is always fun, but it's always trying to fit everything that I had in my room into my small Honda Civic. So I know storage is definitely important. So we have a question that I've seen come up a couple times, and I know that this has been thrown out throughout the past couple years, primarily in the relation to COVID. But Chris, could you shed any light on the possibility of triples returning to UC San Diego? Yes,
so we have been approved to offer some limited amount of triples on campus this for the incoming 2022-23 school year. So those will be kind of spattered about campus. And so we will be having triples again this year. It won't be the large amount that we had in the past, but it will be a fairly big number.
Great, thank you. All right, here is I want to say a specific situation, but I think this applies to many students, is from a parent that says, how does co-signing work if your student has 3 or 4 roommates? Who co-signs to get those students qualified if they are all unemployed? Do all 4 parents need to co-sign?
Yeah, tricky question. John Carlos again at Student Legal Services. And that just kind of depends upon the landlord. It's up to the landlord to determine what they're requiring in terms of evidence. In terms of proof of ability to pay, one of the things that I certainly suggest is that as soon as possible, students start monitoring their own credit. And so getting a copy of the credit report, if you go to annualcreditreport.com, you can get a free copy of your credit report once every 12 months from each of the credit reporting agencies. And perhaps some of the credit reporting agencies, I want to say Experian particularly, is more and more frequently accepting proof of good credit, say by a revolving credit account, by a phone bill, by other things like that. So I would suggest the earlier that your student gets onto that and the more careful they are about monitoring their credit report and to making sure it's accurate, the better off they're going to be. if a landlord, in my experience, a landlord might only require one parent or guardian to be a co-signer for all 4 or 5 or however many tenants. And that obviously puts that parent in a very difficult situation. And so one of the things that I commented in one of the questions that was asked about that specifically, I suggested that, if you're a parent and you're concerned about that, you could certainly ask that other parents or guardians co-sign on behalf of their tenants, but just understand that that doesn't necessarily limit the responsibility of one. It just expands how many people basically the landlord can sue in the event of a lawful detainer or in the event of another type of lawsuit. I hope that answered your question. If not, please let me know.
And John Carlos, I think I'm going to stay with you because this is kind of related. It's a question from the YouTube chat. Do all co-signers need rental insurance, or is it just the renter? And do all renters need renter insurance?
Another great question, and frankly, what I would say, this one I've seen a little more variety with that. Frequently, an individual will just get their own insurance to cover them. Some places will require that a whole group of tenants get insurance. It might make more sense for every tenant on a lease to get insurance. I would suggest that, again, the more coverage, the better. And just so you know, I don't work for the insurance industry. I don't have any stake in the game, but I would absolutely, I always recommend that you get the best that you can. And so if that means that multiple tenants are getting coverage, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, although I appreciate that it might not necessarily be cost effective for everybody.
Thank you for the great answer. Chris, this is coming back to you. We've talked a lot about housing, and you mentioned dining a little bit. This parent asked the dining plans. If all of the dining dollars or money is not used, do they roll over to the next school year, or are they returned by the end of the current school year?
Any unused dining dollars will be rolled over to the following quarter, so they must be used by fall quarter at that time.
Great. Simple, sweet. We like those answers. All right, I'm going to stay with you, Chris. What happens to that prepayment for on-campus housing, the $450 fee, if the student is not selected for on-campus housing?
So the $450 prepayment comes after they have been offered a contract, which means they would have a spot on campus. So you're not paying any money prior to having that spot on campus. By March 14th, you'll find out if the student has a contract. By March 14th, you'll have to pay that $450 prepayment. And after that time, if you do cancel, then that will be in line with our contract termination and cancellation policies, which you can find online.
Great, thank you. Okay, coming to my basic needs off-campus folks. This question is from a family member asking what happens if their student cannot get housing on campus or off campus. How are students expected to attend school, and does the university offer any resources for those students in need?
Definitely a very real question, especially during today's times. Firstly, if your student finds themselves in that situation, the first step we would do is to encourage them to complete our basic needs assistance form to get them directly connected with either Marissa or myself or others of our colleagues to get them connected to not only housing related resources, but also financial wellness resources, as well as food security resources. That's kind of the one-stop shop. We'll get you a consultation. We'll help you get connected to resources that are best going to fit your circumstances. And then answering your question directly, if you were not able to find on-campus housing or off-campus housing, and that's really affecting your students' ability to be successful at the university, again, we do have our temporary housing protocol that if assessed correctly, and if that's the service you need, you can have up to 30 days of a free on-campus stay. again, for emergent situations only. We do have other transitional housing programs that are in the works right now. So I don't want to put them out there as, false information. So again, just reach out to us and we can get resources to you that best fit you and your student.
Great, thank you so much. Chris, I am coming back to you. This is about move out. A parent wondering if move out this year will be staggered similarly to how move-in was in the fall.
I think that's too soon to tell. We're experiencing a lot of COVID fluctuations, so I can't give you an answer on that right now. We will be sure to look out for emails because they will definitely be sent. Sorry, I can't give a better answer than that.
No, it's great. I think we've all through the past couple of years been experienced to having to give that answer that it's going to be determined on COVID-19 protocols, local, state, and university guidelines. A great website for everyone, and I know if you haven't already visited there during your students' time here at UC San Diego, is please do. It is returntolearn.ucsd.edu because that will have the most up-to-date COVID-19 protocols and everything going on. And so a lot of this information or links to at least Housing's website about their protocols for move-in, move-out will be linked on that website. Okay, the last question we have tonight for our live Q&A portion. Again, if you did not have your question answered tonight, please feel free to email parents@ucsd.edu. After tonight's session or anytime you have a question that you need to find out an answer to help your student, or housinginfo@ucsd.edu is going to be that other email address that will be important for your student and you all to know to get your questions answered. Is how do international students without financial aid or a credit score show ability to pay for a lease?
Yeah, and I just typed the answer in, so sorry for making it disappear on you, Dan, in the middle of the question.
Well, this was actually from YouTube, so we've got folks asking the same question, so this is great to know.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's difficult. It's not easy. If potentially a landlord could request that somebody who's based internationally can co-sign. There's no reason why that can't be a possibility. I suppose that the landlord could try to insist that the co-signer be local, but that's not necessarily the case. So yes, folks who are abroad can absolutely be co-signers if necessary. I want to say that there was also a private website that was previously an entity that was previously mentioned, Hugs International, which I don't know anything about, but it sounds like it's also a way of maybe trying to garner evidence to provide proof of ability to pay rent. So you might want to look into that. hugsintl.com is where it appears. Thanks.
Well, great. Thank you so much, you four. You've been fantastic. I know that this has been a barrage of great and fantastic detailed information from you four. So I thank you for your time, your expertise, and your willingness to hang out with us tonight and engage with nearly 800 families over 2 different platforms. I really do appreciate it. And before I let our attendees go, I do want to share some final resources with you all. So again, this PDF or this PowerPoint presentation will be turned into a PDF and emailed out tomorrow with a recording of the entire session from tonight. But here are some resources that we will be sharing with you. A lot of them have been covered tonight by our experts, and if those that haven't been covered, that's why we've got them here. And again, I just want to thank you all for attending this Trying Family Web Series session. We have 2 more coming up this quarter. So they are going to be focused on first-generation students and that contemplation of is it right for them to work on campus during their first year here or even their second. And then also why mentors matter and how campus involvement matters. And how that can shape a student's experience here at UC San Diego, but also prepare them for their next journey. So those 2 sessions will be upcoming in March, and registration will open in the following week. You can find out that information on our website, but if you have received an email to register for tonight's session, you'll get another email to register for these upcoming sessions. And lastly, please ensure to stay in contact with us to answer any questions you may have left over from tonight, or any questions that you have in order to help support your student or about the university. You can reach out to us at the contact information on the screen, or connect with us at these social media accounts. Primarily, that YouTube channel is the one that I always say may be the most important now, because that's where all of our digital resources are, like tonight's session. We have recordings not just from this year's Try and Family web series, but last year's as well, that really includes timeless information that's there to help support your student. So again, thank you to my panelists for your attendance and your participation tonight. And thank you to our attendees, you family members and parents, for taking the time out to support your student as they start their search for housing in the upcoming year. Thank you all. Be well and have a great night.